I'm Rebecca Miller, 34, and for weeks I'd been dreading my father's retirement dinner. Our relationship had been strained for decades, filled with his dismissive comments and cold disappointment. My husband James insisted we attend, saying it might bring closure. I never imagined that night would completely shatter everything I thought I knew about my father, Dr. William Miller, the prestigious cardiac surgeon who never thought I was good enough. Before I dive into what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to face someone who hurt you, and join me on this unexpected journey of revelation. Growing up in Portland, my childhood seemed picture-perfect from the outside. My father, William Miller, was a respected cardiac surgeon at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, known for his groundbreaking techniques and dedication to his patients. My mother, Elizabeth, was a warm, creative spirit who balanced out my father's intensity with her gentle nature. Our home was filled with both medical journals and art supplies, a perfect blend of science and creativity. Everything changed when I was 12. My mother was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia, and within 6 months, she was gone. The loss devastated our small family, but we processed our grief very differently. While I turned to art, painting scenes that captured memories of my mother, my father retreated into his work. The operating room became his sanctuary, and 12-hour shifts turned into 14, then 16. Our home, once warm and full of conversation, became a quiet, empty space where we merely coexisted. In those formative teenage years, I desperately needed my father's guidance and love. Instead, I got a ghost who drifted through our house, too consumed by his own pain to notice mine. When I would show him my artwork, landscapes and portraits that teachers praised for their emotional depth, he would give them a cursory glance before changing the subject to my math and science grades. "Art is a nice hobby, Rebecca," he would say, "but it won't build a future. Your talents would be better applied to medicine." By high school, it became clear that my father had mapped out my entire life: prestigious pre-med program, medical school, and eventually joining his practice. My growing passion for art was dismissed as a childish phase I would outgrow. My bedroom walls were covered with my paintings and sketches, but whenever he entered my room, his eyes would slide past them as if they were invisible. During my junior year, my art teacher, Mrs. Patterson, encouraged me to apply for a summer program at the Rhode Island School of Design. When I was accepted, I was ecstatic, until I had to tell my father. I still remember his response, delivered without looking up from his medical journal: "That's a waste of time and money, Rebecca. I've already arranged for you to shadow Dr. Keller at the hospital this summer." I went to the summer program anyway, using money I had saved from babysitting and selling small paintings at local craft fairs. When I returned, brimming with new techniques and inspiration, my father and I had our first major argument. "You deliberately went against my wishes," he said, his voice cold and clinical, like he was discussing a difficult case with colleagues. "I'm trying to guide you toward a meaningful career, not some fantasy that will leave you struggling to pay rent." "Mom would have supported me," I fired back, immediately regretting using her memory as a weapon. His face hardened. "Your mother isn't here. And I won't support you throwing away your potential on something so frivolous." Our relationship fractured further when I received my college acceptance letters. Despite having the grades for pre-med programs, I chose to attend Willamette University for their excellent art program. My father's response was to inform me that he would pay for tuition only if I switched to pre-med after my first year. I refused. Working multiple jobs while studying art wasn't easy, but it felt like freedom. I rarely went home during those years, spending holidays with friends instead. When I eventually dropped out during my junior year to attend the Pacific Northwest College of Art full-time, my father and I stopped speaking altogether for nearly 2 years. Our interactions during my 20s were limited to tense holiday dinners and the occasional family emergency. Each time, he would inevitably ask when I was going to get serious about my life, as if dedicating myself to my passion wasn't serious enough. Every conversation circled back to my wasted potential and throwing away opportunities that others would be grateful for. Meanwhile, my father's career continued to soar. He pioneered new surgical techniques, published in prestigious medical journals, and received numerous awards and recognitions. The Portland medical community revered him, and his opinions were sought after by colleagues across the country. His success only magnified my feelings of inadequacy, even as I began to make small inroads in the local art community. During those years, I attempted reconciliation twice. The first time was after my first small gallery showing, when I invited him to attend. He came, 45 minutes late, made a brief circuit of the room, then left with a generic, "Good job, Rebecca," that felt as hollow as our relationship. The second time was after he had a minor health scare, an irregular heartbeat that turned out to be stress-related. I stayed with him for 3 days after he was released from the hospital, but our conversation never progressed beyond surface pleasantries and thinly veiled criticisms of my life choices. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had resigned myself to having a father who would never understand or appreciate me. The man who was renowned for saving lives couldn't see that he was slowly killing our relationship with his impossible expectations and refusal to accept me for who I was. 5 years ago, my life changed in ways I never anticipated. I was showcasing my work at a small gallery in downtown Portland, a series of abstract paintings exploring human emotion through color and movement. The exhibition was modestly successful, with a steady stream of visitors throughout the opening night. Near closing time, a tall man with kind eyes spent nearly 30 minutes studying my centerpiece, a large canvas titled Unspoken, depicting the turbulent emotions of words left unsaid. "The way you've layered the cool blues under those fiery reds, it's like you've captured how we bury our true feelings beneath our outward expressions," he said, not turning to look at me as I approached. "It's uncomfortable and beautiful at the same time." That man was James Taylor, a software developer who had recently moved to Portland from Seattle. Unlike most people who would make polite comments about liking the colors or asking about my technique, James seemed to genuinely understand what I was trying to communicate through my art. We ended up talking until the gallery owner politely informed us they needed to close. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant where we talked for hours about everything from art history to technology, from family dynamics to favorite movies. What struck me most about James was how attentively he listened, not just to respond, but to truly understand. When I hesitantly shared stories about my relationship with my father, expecting the usual platitudes about how he probably meant well, James surprised me. "That sounds incredibly painful," he said simply. "To have your passion and talent dismissed by someone whose approval you wanted most." Those words, the straightforward acknowledgement of my experience without trying to explain away my father's behavior, were like a key unlocking something inside me. For the first time, I felt truly seen. James's background couldn't have been more different from mine. Raised by supportive parents who encouraged his interest in computers from an early age, he had built a successful career developing software solutions for healthcare systems. Despite working in a technical field, he had a deep appreciation for the arts and believed strongly in the importance of creative expression. "Logic and creativity aren't opposing forces," he often said. "They're different lenses for understanding the world, and we need both." Our relationship progressed quickly but naturally. Within 6 months, we were living together in a loft apartment with enough space for my painting studio. James transformed one corner into a home office where he could work on freelance projects, and we'd often work in comfortable silence, me at my easel, him at his computer. Sometimes he'd take breaks to watch me paint, asking thoughtful questions about my process or simply observing quietly. My art began to evolve during this period. With James's unconditional support bolstering my confidence, I started experimenting with larger canvases and more ambitious concepts. I began a series exploring the intersection of human anatomy and emotional states, hearts rendered not as Valentine symbols, but as complex organs, brains depicted with synapses firing in patterns representing different emotions. Ironically, my father's medical influence was finding its way into my work, though transformed through my artistic lens. 3 years ago, James proposed during a weekend trip to the Oregon coast. We married in a small ceremony at the Japanese garden, surrounded by close friends and a few of James's family members. I sent my father an invitation more out of obligation than hope. He attended, arriving moments before the ceremony began and leaving immediately after congratulating us with a stiff handshake and a generic gift card. "I have a surgery scheduled tomorrow morning," he explained, checking his watch. "Best wishes to you both." James squeezed my hand as we watched my father walk away. "His loss," he whispered, and somehow those two simple words were enough to prevent my father's indifference from overshadowing our day. With James's encouragement, I applied to several gallery open calls and began showing my work more widely. A curator from Seattle noticed my anatomical series and featured 3 pieces in a group show focused on the body in contemporary art. This led to more opportunities, and gradually, I built a modest reputation in Pacific Northwest art circles. I wasn't making a fortune, but for the first time, my art was being recognized and valued by others in the field. Despite these external successes, I still struggled with deep-seated insecurities. Years of my father's dismissal had planted seeds of doubt that grew despite my best efforts to uproot them. There were nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that everyone was just being nice and my work was actually mediocre at best. James would hold me through these moments of doubt, never dismissing my feelings, but gently helping me see the distorted thinking behind them. "Your father couldn't separate his grief from his parenting," James said during one particularly difficult night. "That's about him, not about your worth or your talent." We had discussed having children, but I was hesitant. The wounds from my relationship with my father ran deep, and I feared repeating patterns I didn't even recognize. James never pressured me, understanding that this was something I needed to work through in my own time. "We have time," he would say. "And when, or if you're ready, you'll be an amazing mother because you know exactly how important it is to support a child's authentic self." As we built our life together, my father became an increasingly distant figure. We exchanged obligatory birthday and Christmas calls, but rarely saw each other in person. I heard about his continuing accolades through former family friends or medical news that James occasionally came across. Each achievement he racked up reinforced my belief that in his mind, a successful surgeon daughter would have been the perfect culmination of his legacy, not an artist daughter whose work he couldn't understand or appreciate. Then came the call that would change everything. It wasn't from my father, but from his administrative assistant, Meredith. "Dr. Miller is retiring next month," she informed me with professional politeness. "There's a formal dinner being held in his honor on the 15th at River Place Hotel. He asked me to extend an invitation to you and your husband." My first instinct was to decline. The thought of sitting through an evening of speeches praising my father while feeling like an outsider in his world was almost unbearable. But James saw it differently. "This might be good closure for you," he suggested. "Not for him, but for you. And I'll be right beside you the entire time." After days of deliberation, I agreed to attend, not for my father, but for myself, to finally accept that his approval was something I would never have and to begin truly letting go of that need. Little did I know that this dinner would unravel everything I thought I understood about William Miller and our fractured relationship. The weeks leading up to my father's retirement dinner were filled with a growing sense of dread that seemed to intensify with each passing day. I found myself obsessing over details that normally wouldn't matter to me. What would I wear? How should I style my hair? Should I mention my recent gallery success, or would that just invite more dismissive comments? "You're overthinking this," James said gently as I rejected the third dress I'd tried on at a boutique downtown. "You could show up in a paper bag and still be the most talented person in the room." But his reassurance couldn't quiet the anxious voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like my father. I eventually settled on a deep emerald dress that was professional yet artistic, paired with a silver pendant James had given me for our second anniversary. The outfit was a compromise between appearing successful on my own terms while still fitting into the formal medical community event. As the dinner approached, my anxiety manifested in increasingly physical ways. I had trouble sleeping, waking up from dreams where I stood naked on a stage while my father lectured an audience about my failures. I lost my appetite, picking at meals that James lovingly prepared. My painting, usually my refuge, became impossible as my hands trembled too much to hold a brush steady. Maybe we should reconsider going, James suggested one evening, finding me sitting motionless in front of a blank canvas. This is taking a real toll on you. No, I insisted, surprising myself with my determination. If I don't go, it's like admitting he's right about me. That I'm not strong enough or successful enough to stand in his world, even for one night. 2 nights before the dinner, I had a full-blown panic attack, my first in years. It hit while I was trying on my dress one final time, the reality of the approaching event suddenly overwhelming me. James found me sitting on the bathroom floor, gasping for breath, tears streaming down my face. I can't do this, I whispered between ragged breaths. I can't sit there while he pretends to be proud of me in front of his colleagues, then looks right through me when no one's watching. James sat down beside me, his back against the cool tile wall. Breathe with me, he instructed, taking my hand and placing it on his chest so I could feel his steady heartbeat. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. We sat there for nearly an hour, breathing together until the tightness in my chest finally eased. Then James said something that struck me as odd at the time. Rebecca, there's something I need to tell you about tomorrow night. His expression was difficult to read, part determination, part something else I couldn't identify. I've been planning something that I think might help, but I need you to trust me. What are you talking about? I asked, suddenly concerned. Just trust that I have your back, he said, squeezing my hand. I always have and I always will. He wouldn't elaborate further, despite my questions. That night, I lay awake wondering what James could possibly be planning. Whatever it was, his quiet confidence gave me a small measure of comfort as I finally drifted off to sleep. The day of the dinner arrived with a sense of inevitability. As I applied my makeup, I tried to prepare myself mentally for every possible scenario, my father ignoring me, making backhanded compliments about my hobby, or worse, using me as an object lesson in a speech about choosing the right path in life. I rehearsed calm, dignified responses, determined not to let him see how deeply his words could still cut me. You look beautiful, James said as I emerged from our bedroom, fully dressed and trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. He was handsome in his charcoal suit, his tie matching the emerald of my dress in a gesture of solidarity that brought tears to my eyes. I'm so nervous I might throw up, I admitted, clutching my small evening bag like a lifeline. Remember, we can leave anytime you want, James reassured me. Just give me the signal and we're out of there. The drive to the River Place Hotel felt surreal. Portland's familiar streets slid by outside the window as my mind raced with memories of past interactions with my father. The time he didn't show up for my high school art show because of an emergency surgery. The graduation ceremony where he left immediately after the diplomas were handed out. The countless conversations that ended with his disappointment hanging heavy in the air between us. You're grinding your teeth, James observed, reaching over to take my hand. Try to relax your jaw. I just keep remembering all the times he made me feel small, I said. Like that dinner party when I was 26, when he introduced me to his colleagues as my daughter who's still finding herself, and then changed the subject before I could mention my first gallery showing. James nodded, but there was something different about his demeanor. Throughout the weeks of anxiety leading up to this night, he had been my rock, concerned, supportive, and empathetic. But tonight, he seemed almost confident. There was a certainty in his posture that confused me. James, what aren't you telling me? I asked as we pulled into the hotel's valet parking. You've been acting strange since yesterday. He turned to face me, taking both my hands in his. I love you, Rebecca. And tonight, I just want you to remember that you are extraordinary, regardless of what anyone else thinks, including your father. Before I could press him further, the valet opened my door, and the moment was gone. We entered the hotel lobby arm in arm, following the signs to the grand ballroom where my father's retirement dinner was being held. With each step, I felt like I was walking toward a reckoning I wasn't prepared for, but James's steady presence beside me was the only thing keeping me moving forward. The River Place Hotel's grand ballroom was transformed for the occasion, with elegant table settings and subtle medical-themed decorations that managed to be tasteful rather than morbid. A large banner reading, "Congratulations on your retirement, Dr. William Miller, 40 years of excellence," hung above the main table. As we entered, I scanned the room for my father, spotting him near the center of the room, surrounded by a circle of admiring colleagues. He looked older than when I'd last seen him 6 months ago, his hair more silver than pepper now, the lines around his eyes deeper. But he still carried himself with the same authoritative presence that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. James gave my hand a reassuring squeeze as we approached. My father looked up, his expression shifting almost imperceptibly as he registered our presence. "Rebecca," he said with a nod that was neither warm nor cold. "You made it." His eyes flickered to James. "And James. Thank you both for coming." No hug. No real greeting. Just an acknowledgement of our presence that felt more like checking off a social obligation than welcoming his only child. "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's a remarkable achievement." "Thank you," he replied, before immediately turning to introduce us to the hospital administrator standing beside him. "John, this is my daughter Rebecca and her husband James." The administrator smiled politely. Following in your father's footsteps in medicine?" Before I could answer, my father interjected. "No, Rebecca chose a different path. She's an artist." The way he said artist with that slight inflection that always made it sound like hobbyist sent a familiar ache through my chest. "How interesting," John replied, his eyes already drifting back to my father. "Will, you were about to tell me about that valve replacement technique you pioneered." And just like that, we were dismissed from the conversation. A server directed us to our assigned table, which I quickly realized was not at the front with family, but near the back of the room with distant acquaintances and junior staff members. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was an afterthought in my father's life, not an essential part of his story. As we took our seats, I leaned toward James. "Well, that went exactly as expected." James didn't seem surprised or offended by our seating arrangement. If anything, he appeared distracted, checking his phone discreetly under the table. "Don't worry about it," he said, patting my hand. "The seating doesn't matter." Throughout the appetizer course, I could hear snippets of conversations around us, all focused on my father's brilliance, dedication, and contributions to cardiac surgery. Dr. Miller saved my brother's life. William's research on valve replacements changed the standard of care. He mentored an entire generation of surgeons. Each accolade was a reminder of the life my father had wanted for me, the path I'd rejected, and the disappointment I represented in his eyes. I pushed my salad around the plate, my appetite non-existent. "You should eat something," James encouraged gently. "We still have the speeches to get through." The speeches. I'd been dreading those most of all. Sure enough, after the main course was served, the hospital's chief of surgery approached the podium and began a lengthy introduction praising my father's 4 decades of service. This was followed by testimonials from colleagues, former patients, and medical school classmates, each one painting a picture of William Miller as a dedicated healer, brilliant innovator, and inspiring mentor. Not one speaker mentioned his role as a father. It was as if that part of his identity didn't exist, or wasn't worth mentioning. Finally, it was my father's turn to speak. He approached the podium with the same confident stride I remembered from childhood, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. "Thank you all for those kind words and for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. "Looking back on 40 years of medicine, I can honestly say I have no regrets about the path I chose." He spoke eloquently about his early days as a resident, the mentors who shaped his career, and the advances in cardiac surgery he'd witnessed and contributed to over the decades. He shared anecdotes about challenging cases and breakthroughs in the operating room. He thanked his colleagues, his surgical teams, and the hospital administration for their support throughout his career. Not once did he mention me or my mother. Then, as he was nearing the conclusion of his speech, he paused and looked out over the audience. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps he would acknowledge me after all. "The only disappointment in my career," he said, his gaze shifting away from me, "is that I wasn't able to pass on my knowledge to the next generation of my family. I had hoped to create a legacy, to see my surgical techniques carried forward by my own blood. But life doesn't always follow the path we envision." My face burned as several heads turned subtly in my direction. I stared down at my plate, wishing I could disappear. Instead, he continued, I've had to content myself with mentoring other young doctors who understood the value of dedication to this noble profession, rather than pursuing artistic hobbies. The words hung in the air, the slight emphasis on artistic hobbies unmistakable. A few uncomfortable coughs broke the silence that followed. From the corner of my eye, I could see people exchanging glances, some looking at me with pity, others with curiosity. Nevertheless, my father concluded, I'm proud of what I've accomplished and grateful for the opportunity to have served this community. Thank you all for being part of this journey. Applause filled the room as he stepped away from the podium, but I couldn't bring myself to join in. The familiar mixture of hurt, anger, and inadequacy washed over me, threatening to drown me in front of this room full of strangers. James's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently, but it wasn't enough to ease the humiliation of being so publicly dismissed by my own father. I need to leave, I whispered, already pushing back my chair. I can't stay here any longer. Rebecca, wait, James said, his voice surprisingly firm. Just give me 5 minutes. For what? To be humiliated more. I hissed, tears threatening to spill. Trust me, he insisted, standing up. 5 minutes. Before I could protest further, James was walking purposefully toward the podium where the hospital director was preparing to make some closing remarks. They exchanged a few words, the director looking surprised, but then nodding and stepping aside. James adjusted the microphone, his tall frame commanding attention as the room quieted in curiosity. I froze in my half-risen position, mortified and confused. What was James doing? Good evening, everyone, James began, his voice steady and confident in a way I'd never heard before. For those who don't know me, I'm James Taylor, Rebecca Miller's husband. I sank back into my chair, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Whatever James was planning, I couldn't look away. I wasn't scheduled to speak tonight, he continued with a self-deprecating smile that somehow charmed the room immediately. But I'd like to take just a few moments of your time to share something I think might interest this distinguished gathering. James reached into his inner suit pocket and pulled out a sleek leather folder I'd never seen before. Dr. Miller spoke about legacy tonight, about passing knowledge to the next generation and making a lasting impact. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially in relation to my wife's work. My face flushed again, but for a different reason. What was James doing? You see, he went on, opening the folder, while Dr. Miller referred to Rebecca's art as a hobby, I thought you might be interested to know what this hobby has actually accomplished. He pulled out what appeared to be magazine clippings and gallery announcements, holding them up one by one. This is from Art Forum's review of Rebecca's solo exhibition at the Bernard Gallery last year, where they described her work as revolutionizing how we visualize the connection between human anatomy and emotional experience. A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father's expression remained impassive, but I noticed his posture stiffen slightly. And this, James continued, holding up another clipping, is from the Seattle Arts Quarterly, highlighting Rebecca's cardiac series that explores the heart not just as a medical organ, but as the symbolic center of human experience. The critic noted that her unique perspective bridges the gap between science and art in a way rarely seen in contemporary painting. He reached for his tablet next, turning it on and holding it up. For those who haven't had the privilege of seeing Rebecca's work, this is Systole and Diastole, the centerpiece of her most recent exhibition. The image displayed was one of my largest and most ambitious pieces, a diptych showing a human heart in both contraction and relaxation, rendered in vivid reds and blues with golden threads representing electrical impulses. It was technically precise in its anatomy, but emotionally evocative in its execution, science and art in perfect harmony. This piece, James explained, was purchased by the Portland Art Museum for their permanent collection last month. But what I'm most excited to share with you all tonight is this. He pulled out an official-looking letter from his folder. Rebecca recently received this invitation from the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Her Medical Humanities series will be featured in their upcoming exhibition on the intersection of science and art, alongside works by internationally renowned artists. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel every eye shifting between James, my father, and me. My hands trembled in my lap as James continued. "What I find most fascinating about Rebecca's work," he said, his voice warm with genuine admiration, "is how it honors both sides of her heritage. The precision and anatomical understanding she brings to her paintings could only come from someone with a deep respect for medical science, something I suspect she inherited from her father." James turned slightly to address my father directly. "Dr. Miller, while Rebecca may not have followed your exact path, she has found a way to honor your influence through her art. Her paintings explore the human body with the same dedication and insight that you've brought to your surgical career, just through a different medium." He turned back to the wider audience. "The critics who have praised Rebecca's work often comment on her unique ability to capture the clinical aspects of human anatomy while simultaneously expressing the emotional experience of being human. In many ways, isn't that what great doctors do as well? Understand both the science of the body and the very human experience of illness and healing." A few heads nodded in agreement. I noticed one older doctor in particular watching my father with an expression I couldn't quite read. "So while Rebecca didn't become a surgeon," James concluded, "she has, in her own way, continued the Miller legacy of helping people understand the wonder of the human body. And I thought that was worth mentioning on this night dedicated to celebrating legacy." He nodded respectfully toward my father. "Thank you for your attention and congratulations again on your remarkable career, Dr. Miller." As James returned to our table, spontaneous applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing more confident. I sat frozen in my chair, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't name. James had just publicly reframed my entire relationship with my father, presenting my art not as a rejection of his world, but as a complementary extension of it. When James sat down beside me, I gripped his hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Why didn't you tell me you were planning this?" I whispered. "Because you would have talked me out of it," he replied simply. "And I needed them, and you, to hear it." Across the room, my father remained expressionless, but I noticed his hands were tightly clasped together on the table. The hospital director had retaken the podium and was making closing remarks, but I barely heard the words. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. Then, as the formal program concluded and people began to mingle, the unexpected occurred. The older doctor I had noticed earlier approached our table, his gaze fixed on me. "You must be Rebecca," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Howard Richards. I worked with your father for 30 years. "Nice to meet you," I replied automatically, shaking his hand. "I've seen your work," he continued, surprising me, "at the West Side Gallery last spring. Your understanding of cardiovascular structures is remarkable for someone without formal medical training." "Thank you," I managed, still off balance from the evening's events. "I've studied anatomy books on my own." Dr. Richards nodded, then glanced over his shoulder at my father, who was watching us from across the room. "What your husband didn't mention," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "is that your father has attended every one of your exhibitions in Portland for the past 8 years. My breath caught. "What?" "He never goes in while you're there," Dr. Richards continued. "Always arrives after the opening crowd has left. But he studies every piece, usually for hours. And he keeps a catalog of every show in his office desk drawer." The room seemed to tilt around me. That can't be right," I stammered. "He's never shown any interest in my work." Dr. Richards shrugged. "William Miller has never been good at expressing himself outside the operating room. But I've known him long enough to recognize when something matters to him." He patted my arm gently. "Just thought you should know." As he walked away, I turned to James, who looked as stunned as I felt. "Did you know about this?" I demanded. He shook his head. "No, I had no idea." Across the room, my father was now making his way toward us, his expression unreadable. The moment of truth had arrived, and I had no idea what would happen next. My father approached our table with measured steps, his posture rigid and formal as always. The room around us buzzed with conversation, but all I could focus on was his face, a face I'd spent a lifetime trying to read for signs of approval that never came. "James," he acknowledged with a nod, then turned to me. "Rebecca." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. I'd imagined confronting my father countless times over the years, rehearsing cutting remarks and eloquent speeches that would finally make him understand how deeply his dismissal had hurt me. But faced with the actual moment, words failed me. James stood, breaking the tension. "I should give you two some privacy," he said, squeezing my shoulder supportively before walking away. My father took the seat James had vacated, his movements stiff and awkward. Up close, I could see the fatigue etched into the lines around his eyes that were the same shade of hazel as mine, though I'd spent years trying not to notice our similarities. "Your husband certainly knows how to command a room," he finally said, his tone impossible to interpret. "James believes in me," I replied, unable to keep the defensive edge from my voice. "Unlike some people." My father's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think?" "That I don't believe in you. How could I think anything else?" The words burst from me with surprising force. "You've spent my entire adult life making it clear that my choices disappoint you, that my art is just a hobby, that I've wasted my potential. Tonight you humiliated me in front of an entire room of people." A few nearby guests glanced our way, and my father lowered his voice. "I was trying to motivate you, Rebecca. To push you toward something stable, something with real impact. By belittling me? By dismissing something that's central to who I am." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's not motivation, Dad. That's control." He started to respond, but was interrupted by Dr. Richards, who approached our table again, this time with deliberate purpose. "William," Dr. Richards said, placing a hand on my father's shoulder. "I think it's time you stopped this charade." My father stiffened. "Howard, this isn't the appropriate moment." "If not now, when?" The older doctor's voice was gentle but firm. "Your retirement dinner seems like exactly the right time to finally be honest with your daughter." I looked between them confused. "What charade? What is he talking about, Dad?" Dr. Richards turned to me. "Your father has a complete collection of newspaper and magazine clippings about your exhibits. Every review, every mention. He even asked me to attend your showing at Foster Gallery last year and take photos since he was at a conference and couldn't go himself." My father's face had grown pale. "Howard." "No, William. Enough." Dr. Richards cut him off. "Rebecca, your father doesn't just attend your exhibitions. He purchased one of your paintings 2 years ago through a third party. It hangs in his office at home. I've seen it." I felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath me. "Is this true?" I asked, staring at my father. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the tablecloth. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Why?" I whispered, a lifetime of hurt and confusion crystallizing into a single question. "Why pretend to dismiss my art if you actually appreciated it?" Dr. Richards squeezed my father's shoulder once more, then tactfully withdrew, leaving us alone with the truth finally exposed between us. My father's composure, the unflappable confidence that had defined him throughout my life, seemed to crumble. He looked suddenly older, smaller somehow. "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "Afraid? Of what?" He looked up then, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in years. "Of losing you completely to a world I didn't understand. A world your mother understood, but I never could." The mention of my mother, so rarely spoken of between us, caught me off guard. "What does Mom have to do with this?" My father's hands, those surgeon's hands that had saved countless lives, trembled slightly as he clasped them together. "Elizabeth, your mother, was an artist too, before we met. Did you know that?" I shook my head, stunned by this revelation. "She studied art in college. She was talented, very talented. But she gave it up when we got married, when I was in medical school. She said my career needed to come first." He swallowed hard. "After she died, when you started showing serious interest in art, it was like seeing her all over again. The same passion, the same talent. But if you recognize that, why would you fight against it?" I asked, struggling to reconcile this new information with the father I thought I knew. Because art took her away from me. The words burst from him with unexpected emotion. Not physically, but part of her always belonged to that other world, a world of creation and expression that I couldn't access. I'd see her looking at paintings in museums with this look of understanding, of connection that I could never share. He drew a shaky breath. Then she was gone, and you were slipping away into that same world. I thought if I could guide you toward medicine, toward something I understood, I could keep you close. I could protect you from the financial struggles she talked about, from the rejection she experienced before she gave it up. So your solution was to become the source of rejection yourself? I asked, incredulous. He winced. I thought I was challenging you to prove me wrong. To be so good I couldn't deny your talent anymore. A bitter laugh escaped him. Instead, I just pushed you away completely. But Dr. Richards said you've been following my career, attending my shows in secret. Why not just tell me you were proud of me? Pride got in the way of pride, he said quietly. My own stubborn pride wouldn't let me admit I was wrong, and then too much time had passed. How could I suddenly show up and claim to support you after years of criticism? You would have thought I was patronizing you, or that I had some ulterior motive. As much as I hated to admit it, he was right. I would have suspected exactly that. The deeper truth, he continued, is that seeing your work hurt. Not because it wasn't good, quite the opposite. Your paintings, especially the anatomical series, they're extraordinary, Rebecca. They show a deeper understanding of the human body than many medical students I've taught. But they also reminded me of what Elizabeth gave up for me and the guilt I've carried about that for decades. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process this complete rewriting of our shared history. My father hadn't dismissed my art out of disappointment. He'd feared it, what it represented, how it connected me to my mother in ways he couldn't follow. The painting in your office, I finally said. Which one is it? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Memento Vitae, the heart with the small bird perched on the aorta. I knew the piece well. It was one of my earliest anatomical works, painted during a period when I was exploring themes of fragility and resilience. The fact that he would choose that particular painting, one of my most emotionally vulnerable, was almost too much to comprehend. I look at it every day, he said softly, and see both you and your mother in every brushstroke. Tears welled in my eyes, years of anger and hurt colliding with this new understanding. You should have told me, I whispered. We've lost so much time. I know, he acknowledged, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw tears in my father's eyes too. I don't expect forgiveness, Rebecca. But I wanted you to know the truth. Your husband's speech tonight made me realize I couldn't retire with this lie still between us. Around us, the retirement party continued, guests oblivious to the seismic shift occurring at our small table in the corner. My father and I sat in silence for several moments, neither sure where to go from here, both processing the collapse of the narrative we'd lived with for so long. Finally, I asked the question that mattered most. Where do we go from here? My father looked at me with an openness I'd never seen before. I don't know, he admitted. But I'd like to find out if you're willing. The days following my father's retirement dinner passed in a blur of emotional processing. James gave me space when I needed it and support when I asked for it, never once saying, I told you so, despite having seen something in my father that I had missed for decades. 3 days after the dinner, I received a text message from my father, the first text he had ever sent me that wasn't purely logistical. Would you be willing to meet for lunch next week? Just the two of us. I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the weight of possibility they contained. After consulting with James, who encouraged me to go but reminded me to maintain boundaries, I agreed to meet my father at a small cafe halfway between our homes. The lunch was awkward at first, both of us treading carefully around decades of hurt and misunderstanding. My father, I realized, didn't know how to talk to me outside the dynamic we'd established. He couldn't criticize my career choices anymore, but he didn't know what else to discuss. I read that article about your upcoming exhibition at MoMA, he finally said after we'd exhausted small talk about the weather and the food. It's a significant achievement. Thank you, I replied, waiting for the but that typically followed his rare compliments. It never came. Instead, he asked, "Would you tell me about the pieces you'll be showing?" The article mentioned themes of mortality and transcendence. The simple question, a genuine expression of interest without judgment, nearly undid me. I found myself explaining my newest series, watching with amazement as my father listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about my techniques and inspirations. He didn't pretend to understand every artistic reference, but for the first time, he was truly trying to enter my world rather than pulling me into his. As we finished our meal, he cleared his throat nervously. "There's something I'd like to show you if you have time this afternoon." Curious, I agreed to follow him back to his house, a place I hadn't visited in over 5 years. The colonial-style home where I'd grown up looked much the same from the outside, but inside, subtle changes were evident. My mother's favorite reading chair had been reupholstered. New bookshelves lined the living room walls. It felt both familiar and foreign, like a place remembered from a dream. My father led me to his home office, his sanctuary that had been largely off-limits during my childhood. He opened the door, and I gasped involuntarily. The walls were covered with images of my artwork, professional photographs of gallery installations, printed copies of online features, even rough sketches I'd posted on my website's blog. And there, above his desk, hung Memento Vitae, the heart and bird painting he'd purchased anonymously 2 years earlier. "I've followed every step of your career," he said quietly, watching my reaction. "Even when I couldn't bring myself to support you publicly." I moved slowly around the room, taking in this physical manifestation of my father's hidden pride. Exhibition announcements were carefully pinned to a bulletin board. A shelf held catalogs from every show I'd participated in, each one seemingly well thumbed through. "Why?" I asked, turning to face him. "Why keep all this secret?" He sank into his desk chair, suddenly looking every bit his 70 years. "At first, it was just to keep track of what you were doing. After we stopped speaking regularly, it was my way of staying connected to your life." He gestured to the collection. "Then, as you became more successful, it became harder to approach you. How could I suddenly claim to be proud of you when I'd been so dismissive before? You would have thought it was disingenuous." "It would have been better than nothing," I said softly. "Better than believing you didn't care at all." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "I know that now. Pride and fear are powerful forces, Rebecca. They kept me from acknowledging what I could see plainly, that you had found your path, regardless of my approval." We spent the next 2 hours in that office, my father showing me articles he'd saved, telling me which of my pieces had moved him most deeply. It was surreal to discover he had opinions about my artistic evolution, that he had noticed when my style changed or when I experimented with new techniques. "Your anatomical series," he said, pointing to images from my gallery show 3 years prior, "demonstrates a better understanding of how the heart functions than many of my first-year residents had. The way you captured the movement of blood through the chambers, it's technically accurate but also conveys something more. The emotional experience of being alive," I supplied. "Yes, exactly." He paused, then added hesitantly, "Your mother would have been extraordinarily proud of you." The mention of my mother, spoken not with grief, but with gentle appreciation, opened another door between us. For the first time since her death, my father and I began to share memories of her, discovering that we each held pieces of her that the other had never known. The following weekend, we took another step forward when I invited my father to properly meet James, not as my husband whom he'd barely acknowledged at our wedding, but as the man who had stood by me and ultimately helped bridge the chasm between us. The 3 of us had dinner at our home, and I watched with amazement as my father and James discovered shared interests in hiking and chess. There were still awkward moments and old patterns that threatened to reemerge, but we all made conscious efforts to forge new paths of interaction. "I owe you an apology as well," my father told James as the evening drew to a close. "I didn't give you a chance, just as I didn't give Rebecca's choices the respect they deserved." James, ever gracious, accepted with a simple nod. We all have blind spots, especially when it comes to protecting the people we love. That phrase, "the people we love," hung in the air between my father and me. He had never been one to express love verbally, and years of estrangement had made such sentiments seem impossible. Yet here was James, casually acknowledging what lay beneath all the conflict and misunderstanding, a father's imperfect, misguided love. The healing process wasn't quick or easy. There were setbacks, moments when old hurts resurfaced or when my father slipped into his habit of offering practical suggestions about my career that felt like criticism. But with each misstep, we found ourselves better able to communicate, to clarify intentions, to give each other the benefit of the doubt. 3 months after the retirement dinner, my exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art opened in New York. James and I flew out a week early to oversee the installation, and my father joined us the day before the opening. Watching him enter the museum, a place so firmly in my world, not his, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride, anxiety, hope, and lingering traces of the hurt child seeking approval. He moved slowly through the exhibition space, studying each piece with the same careful attention he'd once given to patient charts. I stood back, giving him space to experience my work without my anxious hovering. When he finally approached me, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I understand now," he said simply. "What you've been trying to show all these years. The connection between the physical and the emotional, it's what I've spent my career trying to heal without fully comprehending." That evening, at the opening reception, I watched from across the room as my father engaged in conversation with a curator, gesturing animatedly toward one of my paintings. James appeared at my side, slipping an arm around my waist. "Look at that," he murmured. Dr. William Miller, explaining the emotional significance of contemporary art. I laughed softly. Wonders never cease. The true transformation became evident during the brief speeches at the reception. The museum director said a few words about the exhibition, then invited me to speak. As I thanked those who had supported my work, I found myself saying something I never imagined would be possible. I'd particularly like to thank my father, Dr. William Miller, whose career in cardiac surgery inspired many of the anatomical explorations in this series, and whose recent willingness to bridge our differences has been a gift I never expected to receive. When I stepped down from the podium, my father approached me, his expression open and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. "I am so proud of you, Rebecca," he said, the words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. "Not because you've achieved success or recognition, but because you had the courage to follow your own path, even when I tried to divert you from it." That moment didn't erase the years of hurt or instantly heal our relationship, but it marked a turning point, an acknowledgement that we could honor our differences while recognizing the threads that connected us. In the months that followed, my father and I established a new pattern of regular calls and occasional visits. He retired fully from his consulting work and began volunteering at a community clinic, finding fulfillment in mentoring young doctors without the pressure of his former position. I continued my artistic career with a newfound confidence, no longer haunted by the belief that my father saw my work as worthless. James and I also began discussing children again, both feeling that the healing in my relationship with my father had removed a significant barrier. The thought of creating a family no longer carried the fear of repeating dysfunctional patterns, but instead offered the opportunity to build something new while carrying forward the best parts of my heritage. 1 year after the retirement dinner that changed everything, I completed a new painting, a triptych depicting 3 generations of hands: my father's surgeon's hands, my artist's hands spattered with paint, and a small child's hands reaching upward between them. When I showed it to my father, he understood the message immediately. "You're pregnant?" he asked, hope and uncertainty mingling in his voice. I nodded. "For months. We wanted to be sure everything was progressing well before we shared the news." His response, a tight embrace that spoke volumes more than words ever could, confirmed how far we had come. The journey of reconciliation with my father taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I discovered that sometimes people express love in damaged ways because that's all they know how to do. I learned that grief can distort relationships for decades if left unaddressed. Most importantly, I came to understand that it's never too late to build a bridge across the chasms that separate us from those we love, if both sides are willing to take steps toward the middle. My relationship with my father will never be perfect. We still occasionally stumble over old triggers or retreat into comfortable patterns of distance when emotions run high. But we've learned to find our way back to each other, to remember that beneath the misunderstandings and differences lies a connection worth preserving. As I prepare to become a parent myself, I carry this hard-won wisdom that understanding someone's motivations, even when they've hurt you deeply, can transform a relationship in ways you never thought possible. Not by erasing the past or pretending the hurt didn't happen, but by creating space for something new to grow alongside the scars. Have you ever experienced a revelation that completely changed how you understood a difficult relationship in your life? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most healing moments come from knowing we're not alone in these complicated human connections. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family reconciliation and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, from the depths of humiliation to the unexpected gift of understanding, who my father really was all along.